you doing so far? Good? Awesome. Anyways, just a bit of an update, and I don't want to take a whole lot of time. I will be very quick with my comments, but I just first of all want to update you. We did have a meeting with the minister, and again, just so that we're transparent and people know where this is going and why things are happening the way they are with Paul Martin coming here and the minister as well. We took the opportunity to invite the minister here to ensure that we're not wasting time. And I'm glad that it worked out that way, because obviously, we got some really good advice from Paul Martin, and again, seems to remain faithful to the cause. And with respect to education itself, he's somebody who puts his money where his mouth is, and he's somebody who has done some pretty good front-end work in getting us to this point. And as he indicated, obviously he's going to continue to be a champion for the cause. The minister, in our meeting, we talked about a number of different things. We talked about the process that's happening here, and she reiterated her support. And again, just as Paul Martin indicated, what she said was, what's the plan? Get the plan out in front of us, and let's begin there. What's going to happen from here, folks, is that there is going to be a couple of tables that will be established. Those tables are going to look at immediate issues, they're going to look at medium-term issues, and they're going to look at what the rollout of the Ontario process is going to be. And again, just to correct that, it's being suggested that as we look forward, and we just looking back for a second, we saw a proposed Bill C-33. That legislation didn't work. The national process won't work. A regional process in Ontario won't work if it's just an exclusive pan-Ontario approach. And we've been quite clear, and in the meeting, the minister well understands that we're going to have to get our work done to ensure that all the communities and regions within Ontario, say for example the remotes, are going to have their process well stated in terms of what the capacity issues are. I heard one speaker with the purple shirt on earlier. He asked the question, how does this all work together? We're going to have to coordinate those things now. And again, the minister is going to wait with us. She's going to work with us, and again, has indicated that the support will be ongoing. What I wanted to talk about here today, and I'm going to explain this picture here a little bit later, but it's there for you to think about, and maybe you can think about as I'm talking. Where do you think that picture came from? Where do you think it came from? And I'll leave you with that question. But what I want to talk about is setting the context. I understand that so far what we've been talking about and where we've been working with in regards to what does our education look like? What do those systems look like from the perspective of the Ontario region? And what does this overall charting our own path look like? Again, we've concluded here today, and as Grant Chief Peters had pointed out very clearly, this is not going to be one of those pan-Ontario approaches, that we are going to have a really good understanding of what the needs are at the local level, what they are in terms of various education authorities that are doing a lot of really good work. Say, where does ONICA fit into the process going forward? What are the current funding disparities? What works? How do you standardize testing? All of those things are going to have to fit into a process. But one thing that we are hearing, and what I'd like to offer here in terms of maybe a way of thinking, is that we've been kind of pigeonholed because of the current programs under the federal government to think K-12. And we also know that with respect to the legislated requirements of K-12, that we've been struggling for the longest time to get standardized improvements and increased investments in post-secondary. We also know that we got adult learners, those that have went back to school, and I was one of them. I didn't go back to school until I was 24 years old, and that's when I started coming to life again. But I just also want to make the note that one of the areas that we're thinking about is this notion of lifelong learning. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to just kind of point a couple things out here and setting the context, but I'd maybe just ask that we think about a few things going into this discussion of setting the context of figuring out what's all on the table. The first one is we are set back. There is a gap. And, you know, there was a question asked here earlier when we were in some of our interviews, and the question was, well, how do you define the gap? What is the gap? And we know that there's the social gap. There's that from a testing perspective, we know that, you know, certain people meet certain thresholds in testing. We also know that there's the dropout rates, the success rates. So we know that when we look at the gap, that it's going to be something that is going to differ across the board. And part of the work that we're doing here is getting a standard definition of what the gap is going to be. The other point that I'll make is that we have broken systems. And I know that one thing we can clearly say going forward is that we've been working with the federal government for the last 10 years that has had no real way forward. They've not been working with us in good faith. And what I would like to say is that, you know, sometimes we're creatures of habit. We get used to working in that mode, and we get used to reacting that way. So it's going to be a challenge, I think, at times for us to change the way we work with one another. We're going to have to recognize that this is going to be an all-inclusive process. So all the different networks, different authorities, and different associations across the region, the remotes, the southern communities, this is going to require that we're all going to have to work together in the same circle. So again, the way we view this is going to be a little different as well. We have our own cultures, our languages, and our own traditional systems. And again, that's where I'd like to maybe spend a couple minutes, and I believe as many of the elders and knowledge keepers have gotten up here, that's where much of our strength lies. But we're also dealing with the challenge that some of that is locked in and codified in the language. So obviously we're going to recognize the need to have to go back to addressing the bigger issue of the language. I know the elder just spoke here a second ago, and what she had pointed out, she said, you know, we can offer these programs, but we're going to have to follow through on these. We're going to have to do the work to reclaim the language, and I would say that I believe that's a challenge, but we have to look deeper at the reality there. Our language is our language is about the land, and you know, much of what we've been constrained by and what's oppressed us was the Indian Act system. And it's the Indian Act system is one of those things that is going to have to go hand in hand. So as we look at education, we're going to, in the same breath, going to have that discussion with the Minister of Indian Affairs in Canada and say, listen, we need to break down the barriers of the Indian Act, and we need to recognize that our access to the land, our authority and jurisdiction on the land goes hand in hand with reclaiming the language. That's part of the Truth and Reconciliation process. So again, I'd like to say that something that is very simple and straightforward as the language and having to just reclaim the language, it's going to have to go hand in hand with a lot of other work that we're going to do politically. And you know, these are things that guys like Grand Chief Gord Peters have seen for a number of years sitting around the political tables, that you know, there's really complex policy issues that we're going to have to work through. But I think the point being with this new government, and this being a Liberal majority both in federal and provincial, is that we actually have an opportunity. And I think that that's going to require us to have this plan. So the point being that yes, we have a need, and the issues are quite dire in our communities, but we're going to have to begin somewhere. What I do see, however, is that there's a lot of strengths that we have, and I'm fascinated. I'm actually comforted when I hear a lot of the knowledge keepers and folks that are working in education that have the language. I think we do have some strengths that we can rely on. But I'd like to point a couple things out here. In securing a future for our children, obviously the platform that I was elected on, it's now become securing our rightful place as a political agenda in Ontario. But what goes hand in hand with that is this education symposium and the goal to achieve charting our own path forward. But if we can, it's often how we look at things and how we conceptualize going forward. And again, I'd just like to point out that when we look at the issue of lifelong learning, there's a continuum of education, and we've thought about it in our own community of Serpent River, and we had the debate, how long should our strategic plan be? And what we looked at was, okay, it could be 3 years, it could be 5 years, but what we determined, a number of us, was that in order to have a really good strategic planning process, we have to look at 25 years. And the reason why we felt it was important to look at 25 years is because the baby that is born today, everything that child can actually obtain throughout its childhood and working through the various stages of human development and going through preschool and going through elementary, K to 12, post-secondary. It's when that child turns about 25 years old when they're ready to have their children. It's that time. If we do everything within that 25 years, then we've successfully laid the foundation for the next generation. So I think in terms of looking at a continuum of, what is that time frame for making sure that we have a strong focus on education? It's 25 years. But the added aspect that I would leave with you on that is, there's also a lot of people, and you see it in our many of our cultures, that there's a focus on prenatal. That when a mother is carrying a child, there's a certain environment that she needs to be in, or you often hear or see certain things taking place that are pretty deeply rooted in our customs and cultures. So a way in which that woman carries her child, those are very important aspects of making sure that child has a healthy bringing into this world. So also too, when we look at lifelong learning, the point is that maybe it's even when that woman is carrying that child. That's a very important part of that child's education. So I just wanted to make the point that the whole issue of lifelong learning really should be much more ingrained into this system than just thinking that we're focusing on K to 12. I think from the perspective of government, the statutory requirements for education and programs, we focus on the way they want to deliver that. But we know our system is much greater as well. We've heard this morning from the elder and Grand Chief Peters recognize again the aspect of conveying those responsibilities through our elders and through those oral instructions. Again, a very important part of our education. I guess one of the examples that I'll use here is that part of the Cree culture and a number of the communities in the north, that walking out ceremony, and I'm not in any real authority to speak on that because I've not done that ceremony, but I've seen it once or twice. And in that ceremony, we know that child is in that Tikanagan for a certain period of time, and their feet don't touch the ground. And there's a reason for that, and it's to ensure that there's an integration of teachings and instruction and relationship that occur in that child's life. It's not just, let's bundle that little baby up so he doesn't get out of hand, sort of thing, right? That baby is bundled up in that Tikanagan, so that way there's a relationship that the family, that the community has with that child, and that child is actually observing everything around, and that they know that they're safe and they're comforted in that family. So it's a community process from the time that child is born till the time that they put their feet on the ground. That's a very very intricate teaching system and model for the Cree people. And it's one that if you watch that child after, they're very sure, they're very certain, and they have very strong relationships in the community. And those are the things that we need to rely on and bring into the process. Anyway, I want to maybe just wind up here and just set the context that way, but I wanted to give you this picture and ask you to think about where this may have came from. And I'm actually gonna give a little bit of a reality check here, because this particular picture comes from a community near Sandy Lake, and this picture is a little piece of art that I have that I asked the chief up in Couchiching to. I asked him if I could have it and use it. He said sure. But you see in the picture here is the little child was going to school in a little schoolhouse that when this government came in, the former government, the federal government came in, they lost their funding. So there was no more school in that little community. And you know, the community essentially lost a lot from the previous government. But one of the things they lost was the ability to deliver education services to the small population of children that they have in the community. But if you look in the picture here, there's some houses, there's some snow, there's a tree, there's the little child with a smile on their face. And the little child says, I love you, Dad. That's what that little child wrote. And you know, I looked around the community, and what I saw was not a lot. This is from one of our remote communities that, again, as I indicated, they've experienced the adverse impacts of a government that just doesn't care about our people. But in this picture here, somehow this little child still raises a sense of hope, and still is able to express, you know, how much he loves his father. And you know, when I look at the community now and the challenges that have occurred, and the education opportunity that was ripped away from that community, and now that the community has responded by kids having to leave the community and going somewhere else, I think that there's something definitely wrong with that situation. And I bring this picture to you today to show you that, you know, through the eyes of this child, you know, despite whatever substandard conditions may have existed in that community, there was still love in that community, right? And that there was still the ability to learn and convey something so positive and beautiful. And I bring this here because I think that we ought to dedicate much of the work that we're doing here in the area of bringing forward a strong education system for our First Nations. We need to dedicate it to these children that may not have the type of education that they deserve. That is a human right. That is a right of all Canadians. And again, we definitely focus on our communities and look at the grassroots systems and the language and the land and the relationship to the land. Much of what's been left out of the discussion with government, they're now recognizing that needs to be part of the process. So again, I just wanted to, I won't say much after this until the end of the meeting, but I certainly want to thank you and congratulate all the work and success that's happening in our communities, and know that we've got much more work to do. And again, this is my picture to share with you. Miigwech.
Thank you very much, Regional Chief. I think that will really help set the stage for the discussion and input session that we're going to undertake now.